So, good morning. Today's daf is Lamed. We are going to start on Kaf Tet Amud Bet at the bottom. And it begins approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom on Kaf Tet Amud Bet with the following story. Amar le Eliyahu le Rav Yehuda, Achoa de Rav Salah Hasida. Eliyahu Navi would occasionally make appearances and speak to the Chachamim. And one day he said to Rav Yehuda, the brother of Rav Salah Hasida, he gave him 3 pieces of advice. He said, Lo tirtach velo techete. Don't get angry and you won't commit any sins. Lo tirve velo techete. And not only that, but don't get drunk, you'll also avoid doing sins. Now obviously both of these issues come down to the same core problem, which is when you are angry and when you're drunk, you lose your senses to a certain extent and you're unable to think rationally. So Eliyahu Navi tells Rav Yehuda, avoid anger and avoid drunkenness. Both of these things will lead you to problems. And when you go out on the way, when you go out on a trip, first you should always confer with your maker, so to speak. What does that mean? It means, as Rashi says, Tol Reshut, take permission from Hashem before you go. You should say a prayer before you go out, and that's Tefilat HaDerech that the Gemara is about to discuss. What does it mean? So the saying was, you should first speak with Hashem and then go. So it says, what does it mean? Confer with Hashem and then go out. Amar Rabbi Yaakov says, Amar Rav Chisda, that Rav Chisda said, Zot Tefilat HaDerech. What he meant was, what Eliyahu Navi meant when he was speaking to Rav Yehuda was, you should always say Tefilat HaDerech before you go on a trip. My Tefilat HaDerech. What is Tefilat HaDerech? What is the nature of this prayer? Yiratzon milefanecha Hashem Elohai. May it be your will, Hashem my God, shetolicheni l'shalom, that you will guide me in peace, or towards peace, v'tatzideni l'shalom, and you should cause my steps to go in peace, v'tismecheni l'shalom, and you should support me for peace, v'tatzileni mikaf kol oyev orev baderech, and you should save me from the hands of any enemy or ambusher on the way, v'tishlach beracha b'maaseh yadai, and you should put blessing into the work of my hands, v'titzneni l'chenu l'chesed l'rachamim b'einecha u'b'einei kol ro'ai, and you should give me grace and kindness and mercy in your eyes and the eyes of all who see me. Baruch atah Hashem shamayat tefillah. Blessed are you, Hashem, who hears tefillah. So this is the prayer known as Tefilat HaDerech. Amar Abaye says, however, le'olam lishatef inish nafsheh b'adei tzibura. Now we move to Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. A person should always include himself together with the tzibur. In other words, he doesn't like that version of the prayer. That version of the prayer is in the singular. It's saying, help me, guide me, support me. He says, no, it should be in the plural. How so? Hechinema, yiratzon milefenech Hashem Elokeinu. You should say, may it be your will, Hashem, our God. Shetolichenu l'shalom v'chulei. It should be, Hashem, guide us in peace. And cause our steps to go in peace. And support us. And save us. It shouldn't be me, it should be us.
He's referring to the
Tefilat HaDerech.
Even if he's going by Yachid?
Right, he says it should still always be in the plural, because whenever you ask for something, it's better, Rashi says on the side, it's always better to ask B'lashon Rabim. You should always include yourself with everybody else. Just like when we say Mishaberach for somebody, we always say B'toch Shar Cholei Yisrael. We always say, together with all of the other sick people, you should heal these people. If we single ourselves out, then we're asking for individual merit, and on individual merit one might not pass the test. But when you put yourself together with all of the Jewish people, so then you have more merit on your side, and your tefillah has a better chance of being answered. That's sometimes there are exceptions because that's personal. Sometimes we speak from our personal, for personal needs. But when we're doing something that's a formal prayer, generally the formal prayers are structured in the plural. That's generally the case. So, emat mitzaleb, when should a person say Tefilat HaDerech? Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rav Chisda. Rabbi Yaakov said that Rav Chisda said, Misha she'amealech baderech, from the time that he goes out on the way. In other words, at the beginning of the trip, when he starts the trip, that's when he should say Tefilat HaDerech. Ad kama, until how much? Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rav Chisda, ad parsa, until a parsa. So what's interesting here is that what does it mean until how much? So there are actually three opinions about what this means. Okay, one says that what it means is how far do you have to be going in order to justify saying Tefilat HaDerech? And the answer would be a parsa is the amount of distance that one has to traverse. Anything else is not really considered a significant trip. Like if you run over to CVS, you don't have to say Tefilat HaDerech. Okay, if you're going somewhere more significant, that takes at least an hour and a quarter to get there, so now you're talking about a significant trip that we would say Tefilat HaDerech for. But anything less than that is a local trip, you're not going to have to say Tefilat HaDerech. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation is, how soon after you leave home do you have to say Tefilat HaDerech? Ad parsa, meaning within the first parsa, is when you need to say Tefilat HaDerech. So even if you're going on a very long trip, you're going on a 10-hour drive, you should try to say Tefilat HaDerech within the first segment of the trip. The third opinion, which is actually brought, all three of these are brought in the Shulchan Aruch as valid applications. The third thing that the Shulchan Aruch brings is, let's say you forgot to say Tefilat HaDerech. You need to say it before you're within a parsa of your destination. Otherwise it's considered that the trip is almost over. You're almost there, and like you're getting, let's say you've traveled all the way from, I don't know, New Hampshire or something, and you're coming back to Maryland, and right as you're about to, you're about around the corner from your house, and you say, I forgot to say Tefilat HaDerech, I'd better say it now. It's too late. I mean, you're almost home. So at some point really ideally it should be at the beginning of the trip, but certainly not when you're already home should you be saying it. So all three of these things are true. It has to be a significant trip. You should try to say it at the beginning of the trip, and once you're almost home, once you're almost at your destination, you can no longer say Tefilat HaDerech.
So is that by the distance or by the time?
It's really by distance. It's really supposed to be by distance.
When you leave your city.
When they talk about it, they're talking about it in terms of distance. The application today, it's more complicated because our trips, we traverse the same amount of distance that they would traverse in, let's say, a very long time. Like a parsa for them would take a very long time. For us, it would take 10 minutes or something like that in a car. So it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily match up. So I think most of the poskim today use time as the factor instead of distance. They don't use distance as the factor, but I think it's an hour and it's about 72 minutes.
What is it your job is driving?
Right.
I drive all day from morning to evening.
Right. It depends. The question is, how far out of your area are you going? Like if you're traveling out of your area, then if you're going more than
Virginia,
that, right? So then you would say Tefilat HaDerech.
To Virginia?
Yeah.
Do I do that on a regular basis?
Yeah, you could say Tefilat HaDerech every day. Doesn't hurt.
Does it have a few of gomel?
That's a whole other story. We don't want to get too far from our daf. So that's a whole other discussion of Birkat HaGomel. So he says Vehechim Mitzaleh. So, how should the person say Tefilat HaDerech? Amar Rav Chisda Amar Me'omed. So Rav Chisda says you should stand still when you say Tefilat HaDerech. In other words, you shouldn't be walking. If you're actually driving along or you're actually walking, you shouldn't say Tefilat HaDerech. Then you should stop. Okay, Rav Sheshet Amar. Rav Sheshet says, Afilu me'alech, even if you're walking, you can say it, which is actually what the bottom line halacha is. It's brought in the Shulchan Aruch, that even while you're in transit, you could say Tefilat HaDerech. You don't have to stop to say it. Rav Chisda, Rav Sheshet havu ka'azdei ba'orcha. So it happened that Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshet were once going on a trip together. So one of them says that you need to stop for Tefilat HaDerech. One of them says you don't need to stop. You could say it along the way. So what did they do? So Kam Rav Chisda v'Kam Mitzaleh. Rav Chisda stopped to say Tefilat HaDerech because according to him, you have to stand still when you say Tefilat HaDerech, just like you would stand still to say the Amidah. For Rav Sheshet, though, so he doesn't hold that you have to do that. So Amar le Rav Sheshet l'shama'eh. Rav Sheshet said to his assistant, because Rav Sheshet was blind, so he didn't know what was going on. So he said to his assistant, Maika Avid Rav Chisda. What is Rav Chisda doing? Amar le said to him, Ka'eum tzaleh. Right now he's standing still and praying Tefilat HaDerech because he holds you have to stop for Tefilat HaDerech. So you might say Rav Sheshet is going to say, well, I don't hold that you need to do that, so let's keep walking. But he didn't say that. Amar le okman nami ledidi ve'atzli. Hold me up and I'll also say Tefilat HaDerech, because remember he's blind, so he has a person who's helping him. Mihyot tov al tikarera. When I have a chance to be good, why be called bad? In other words, even though I hold that really you could say Tfilat HaDerech when you're walking, since Rav Chisda is more stringent about this, it doesn't hurt to be stringent. So it's something that is an important lesson, because many times people will have like a lenient opinion about something, and they'll go into an environment where people are more stringent about it, and they'll say, I don't care about this, I'm lenient about it, I can do it any way that I want. You don't have to do it. Just because you have a lenient view doesn't mean that you have to follow the lenient view when you're in the presence of other people who are following the stringent view. It's okay, it doesn't hurt to follow along with their view. So let's say, for example, a person doesn't keep certain chumrot in kashrut or something like that. So they come to some place where they do keep chumrot, certain stringencies. Or they come to a place, let's say on Pesach, where people don't eat kitniot. You don't say, well, I'm going to bring my kitniot and I'm going to eat it right here because, I eat kitniot. You don't have to do that. Just allow things to be the way that they are, and when in Rome, do as the Romans do, especially when they're being more stringent than you. You don't have to show your leniency. So here you see Rav Sheshet, he didn't want to say to Rav Chisda, hey, you don't have to be so stringent, I'm going to go with my lenient opinion. He went along with what Rav Chisda was doing. And in fact, the Rishonim here argue, well, what is the bottom line halakha then? Is Rav Sheshet saying really you should stop? Is he saying really you shouldn't? Some people hold like Rav Sheshet, some people decide the halakha like Rav Chisda. Basically, the Shulchan Aruch says there's no problem with stopping. If you can stop and have more kavanah, that's wonderful. But really, the bottom line halakha is like Rav Sheshet, that you're allowed to say it even as you are traveling along. We learned about two abridged forms of tefillah in the last daf. One was called Havinenu. Havinenu is the prayer that basically takes the first three berachot of the Amidah, the last three berachot of the Amidah, and the middle ones, instead of having 13 individual berachot, it summarizes all 13 in one paragraph. That's Havinenu. Okay. Then there was something called Tefillah Kitzara. Tefillah Kitzara was also mentioned at the end of the previous Mishnah and was discussed at the bottom of the previous Amud. And there, the Tefillah Kitzara is like one sentence. It doesn't have any of the structure of the Amidah. It's just one or two sentences that a person says if they're in a place of danger and they don't have the opportunity to say the Amidah at all. So the Gemara asks, what is the difference between Havinenu and Tefillah Kitzara? Havinenu litzaluye gimel kamaita vegimel batraita. With Havinenu, you have to say the first three berachot of the Amidah normally. You have to say the last three berachot of the Amidah normally. And if you were to say Havinenu, let's say you're in a place where you feel rushed. Not a dangerous place. You don't say Havinenu in a dangerous place. You say Havinenu in a time when you're rushed and you fear interruption. So you can say the first three berachot, the Havinenu beracha in the middle, and the last three berachot of Amidah. But that actually counts as an Amidah. So if you get home and there's still time to pray mincha, let's say, you don't have to go back and pray mincha again if you said Havinenu. It counts. I'm sorry. And he doesn't have to go back and repeat it. Okay, but Tefillah Kitzara lo ba'el litzaluye lo gimel kamaita v'lo gimel bartraita. Whereas with Tefillah Kitzara, he doesn't have to say three berachot before, three berachot after. He doesn't have to get Magen Avraham, Mechayem Mitim. He doesn't have any of that. It's just two sentences. And when he gets home, he has to go back and say the Amidah. What is Tefillah Kitzara? It's you're in the middle of southeast, you're in the middle of a dangerous neighborhood. Alright, and you don't feel safe. You can't stop even for 1 minute to say the Amidah, even for 5 minutes to say the Amidah. So you say these two-line tefillot, and there were a few different versions of what Tefillah Kitzara would be. In the Shulchan Aruch it brings the definitive version. You would say this basically in lieu of saying a real Amidah, but it doesn't count as the Amidah. What does it do? It says basically that if you now miss the time of Mincha, you don't have to go back at Arvit and say a second Arvit Amidah to make up for Mincha. But if you get home in time before the time of Mincha is over, you do have to go back and say the Amidah. It doesn't count as an Amidah actually. It's just something you say when you're in a dangerous situation and you can't even stop for a minute to say an Amidah at all. And further, and moreover, v'hilcheta havinenu me'omed tefillah kitzara ben me'omed ben me'alech, that Havinenu is said standing still, whereas this Tefillah Kitzara, these short two-line tefillot that a person can say, you can say them even when you're walking, obviously, because it's for a dangerous situation. You might not be able to stand still. Whereas Havinenu is really something that's said when you're rushed. not when you're in danger. So therefore you have to stand up for it just like you would stand still for a regular Amidah. It has the structure of a regular Amidah, except that the middle, instead of being 13 individual Berachot, is one paragraph with a few words representing each of those Berachot. And as we mentioned, in some of the new Sidurim, for example, the Korah and Sidur, at both the Sephardic version and the Ashkenazi version, have Havinenu in there, and the old Birnbaum Sidur of yesteryear, the Ashkenazic Sidur that got supplanted but first replaced by Art Scroll, when Art Scroll Sidur became popular, had Havinenu in it as well. Now we go on to the next piece in the Mishnah.
By these days?
Yeah, but you can only say it under certain conditions. Like you can't say it from during the time that we say V'tin talu matar livracha, you're not allowed to say it. So from about December through Pesach, you're not allowed to say it. You can only say it from like now. You could say it if a person were in a situation where, let's say, there's a meeting in 2 minutes, you're not going to be able to make it. You can't say the whole Amidah. You could say Havinenu, and you would be able to do that in that circumstance. But you're not supposed to make a habit of saying it as your regular Amidah. Like I don't feel like saying the Shmona Esrei, so I'm going to say Havinenu all the time. That was why Abaye said in the previous Gemara, Abaye said he criticized or he cursed somebody who said Havinenu as a regular practice. It's not a good thing to do.
And when it comes to in the situation of Pikuach Nefesh, anyway, you wouldn't think of Mincha.
Of course not. Right. So Tefillah Ketzara, if a person could say this very short prayer as they're running, that's still something. It's only 2 lines. If you see it on the previous page, it would be able to be done even if a person's running. Hayar rochev al chamor. If a person is riding on a donkey and the time of prayer comes, what should he do? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Hayar rochev al chamor ve'egia zman tefillah. If a person's riding on his donkey and the time of prayer comes, im yesh lo mishi yochaz et chamoro yered lemata v'yitpalel v'im lav yeshiv b'mkomo v'yitpalel. If he has somebody who can hold on to his donkey, okay, while he's going to say the Amidah, you should get off the donkey and say the Amidah because the donkey's not going to run away. But if he doesn't have anybody to hold the donkey, so what will happen if he gets off the donkey? He's not going to be able to concentrate because his donkey is going to be walking away while he's saying the Amidah. So if he has somebody to hold it, that's what. If not, he should sit on the donkey and recite the Amidah sitting, just like a person would do in a situation where it's impossible for them to stand. When it's impossible for a person to stand, they're allowed to sit and say the Amidah. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, Ben kach uven kach, yeshev b'mkomo v'yitpalel l'fishein datom yoshevet alav. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, no matter what, even if you have somebody to hold your donkey, you shouldn't get off of it to say the Amidah. Because you know what? It's such a big hassle to get off the donkey, to get back on the donkey. You're going to feel rushed because, I had to get off the donkey now, I'd better hurry really fast, get back on. Someone's holding the donkey for me. Because the guy's holding the donkey for you, you're going to feel pressured to rush back onto the donkey. So getting off of it, when you come off of the donkey, you're going to feel out of sorts. You're not going to be able to fully concentrate on your prayer. And therefore he says, even if you have somebody there who's willing to hold your donkey for you, you shouldn't get off the donkey to say the Amidah. And in fact, that's what's brought down in Shulchan Aruch as a halacha. I guess the analogy to today would be you're driving down the street and you see some guy and you say, hey, can you just watch my car for a second? I'm going to say the Amidah. Now we can lock our car now. So we maybe we could get away with that. But in a situation where you couldn't do that and you had to say, hey, could you watch my bike for a second? You don't know who this person is. Maybe they're going to walk off with your bike. You're going to be nervous. You're going to feel like you imposed upon them. And they're standing there waiting for you. So you're not going to have full kavanah. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says there. So then, Amar Rava, Vitem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, halacha ke Rabbi, and Rava, and some say it was Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, said the halacha follows Rabbi, that in a case where you have even a donkey, even if you have somebody there who can hold it for you, because getting on and off is something that is a little bit of a hassle to do, and therefore your mind will not be fully focused, and you're going to be worried that you're imposing on this person who's holding your donkey. Therefore, you should just sit on the donkey and say the Amidah. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Suma u'misha eno yachol lechaven et haruchot, a blind person and somebody who can't tell what direction they're facing in any way. So yichaven libo keneged aviv shebashamayim. So he should just focus his heart on his Father in heaven. In other words, if you don't know what direction you're facing, you can still pray. We don't say because you can't face Yerushalayim that you can't pray. Obviously, we should try to know which direction we're praying in, but when it's impossible, it's impossible. Because the pasuk says they should pray to Hashem. The main thing is that you're directing your prayer to Hashem. If a person is outside of Israel, he should face Eretz Yisrael. As it says, they should pray to you facing their land. Okay, even those who are outside of the land of Israel. This is part of Shlomo HaMelech's prayer when he dedicated the Beit HaMikdash. If you're in Israel, you face Jerusalem. Because it says you should pray to Hashem derech ha'ir, the way of the city that you've chosen. In other words, facing Yerushalayim. So if you're in Israel, it's much more complicated. You don't just face east like we do here. You have to know, what direction am I relative to Jerusalem? Now it's really complicated. If you're in Yerushalayim itself, you have to know where is Har HaBayit relative to where I am. So every house could be facing a different direction to pray, because if they know which direction is the Beit HaMikdash. If you're in the Beit HaMikdash itself, God willing, we should have that problem one day. If you're in the Beit HaMikdash itself, what do? You face the Beit Kodshei HaKodashim, you face the Holy of Holies. Because it says you should pray facing this place. Let's say you were in the Kodesh HaKodashim. For most of us, that wouldn't apply unless you are the Kohen Gadol. So maybe one day, Be'ezrat Hashem, you'll be there. You should face the kaporet, the covering of the Aron when he's praying. Okay. Now there was an area of the Azara, there was an area of the courtyard that was behind the Kodesh HaKodashim. That even a regular Kohen could go in. A Yisrael couldn't really go back there, but a regular Kohen could go back there, could be behind the Kodesh HaKodashim. So in that case, he faces towards the Kodesh HaKodashim. He should be as if he's in front of the kaporet. In other words, he should face towards, that most of the Mefarshim interpret it to mean that he should face backwards, basically. So everyone's going to be facing forwards, because they're facing towards the Aron Kodesh, and he's facing the other way. And actually in the Beit HaMikdash you faced west during the prayer, because the Kodesh HaKodashim was west in the Beit HaMikdash. It wasn't east. Opposite of what we think. Okay? So if you were in the Beit HaMikdash, you pray to the west, because actually the Kodesh HaKodashim was to the west of the Beit HaMikdash. But if somebody's behind the Kodesh HaKodashim, they're facing east when they pray. But the point is that you're all focusing in on one area. So therefore the Tosefta says, Nimtza omid b'mizrach machzir panav l'ma'arav, b'ma'arav machzir panav l'mizrach, b'darom machzir panav l'tzafon, b'tzafon machzir panav l'darom. So therefore if somebody in the east is facing west, somebody in the west is facing east, somebody in the south is facing north, somebody in the north is facing south, nimtzu kol Yisrael mechavenim et libam l'makom echad. Therefore the entire Jewish people are focusing on one area. It unites all of the prayers of the Jewish people because they're all facing the same location. Amar Rabbi Avin v'yitem Rav Avina. Rabbi Avin said, and some say it was Rav Avina, Maikira, what pasuk do we have that indicates this idea that everybody focuses in on the same place? Because it says, Migdal David Savarech, your neck is like Migdal David, like the Tower of David. This is from Shir HaShirim, of course. Banui letalpiot, built letalpiot. What does letalpiot mean? Tel shekol piot ponimbo. It's talpiot stands for tel, the hill, that all mouths, piyot, are facing. So Tal Piyot is Tel Shekol Piyot Ponimbo. That's the idea of Yerushalayim is the hill that every mouth is facing during prayer, and that is what unites us in our tefillot. Avod Shmuel. We already had that from it's already explicit in Shlomo HaMelech, and this is but there are two ideas. One idea is what Shlomo HaMelech is saying, which is for the individual. For the individual, it's important that they be facing and they be connecting with the idea of the Beit HaMikdash when they pray. And that's why the Rambam says a person who's praying should envision himself as if he's standing, in the Kodesh HaKodashim and everything. But there's another idea, which is that Yerushalayim being the center of the focus of the Jewish people, not just as an individual that I'm praying, focusing on Yerushalayim, but that we as a nation are united by our focus on Yerushalayim. This they get from the pasuk in Shir HaShirim. So Avod Shmuel v'Levi ki yavu ba'il me'pak le'orcha. When the father of Shmuel and Levi would go out for a trip, havu makdemeu mitzalei, they would pray the Amidah before they left home. And when the time of Kriyat Shema would come, they would read it. So they would do it backwards, actually. If they got up at Amud HaShachar, they got up at dawn or before dawn. So once dawn came, this is 72 minutes before sunrise, they would pray the Amidah, but not the Shema, because ideally one should pray the Shema at sunrise, right before sunrise. So they would say the Amidah at home, and we're going to see why they did this. It was because they wanted to be able to stand still when they said the Amidah, and they knew they would be traveling. So to say the Shema when you're walking, you're allowed to. You just have to stand still for the first pasuk. But for the Amidah, they wanted to be able to stand. So they would stand, say the Amidah, and then when they were traveling, later on, they would be able to say the Shema. So Kiman, Ki Haitana, where did they get this from? From the following Baraita. The Tanya, it says in the Baraita, Hishkim latzet laderech, if a person gets up early to go on the way, Mevi'in lo shofar v'tokea, obviously if it's Rosh Hashanah, he must be having to go on some emergency trip, because otherwise he wouldn't be traveling on Rosh Hashanah, we assume. But they bring him a shofar in the morning and he blows it. Lulav u'minanea, they bring him a lulav to shake. Megillah v'koreba, they'll bring him a megillah if it's Purim. All of this is once you reach Amud HaShachar, once you reach dawn, you're allowed to do all of these mitzvot b'di'avad in a situation of shata dachak, when you're in trouble, when you have a what do you say? A pressing circumstance. A pressing circumstance. So then you have to do this mitzvah even before sunrise. Normally, all of the mitzvot of the day we try to wait till sunrise to do that. But when you're in trouble and you're pressured, you have to leave very, very early. You're allowed to do it even at dawn. So so therefore ukishiyagia zaman kriyat shema. Correct. And then when the time for shema comes, you can read it, because the shema you don't need any special props to do that. You can do that wherever you are, and even if you're traveling. So you can 72 minutes before sunrise, you can do all these other mitzvot b'di'avad, or when you're in a situation of difficulty, of pressure. And then when the time comes for shema, you would do it. Hishkim l'shev b'karona basfina, when a person gets up early to go in a wagon or to go on a boat somewhere, so mitpalel, he should pray. And when the time for Shema comes, he should read it. And so it's the same idea, because that's a situation where you're not going to be able to stand still to say the Amidah. That's the problem. So therefore you say the Amidah even before you leave. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, ben kach ben kach, korei kriyat shema u'mitpalel kadei she'yismoch kula latfilah. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar disagrees. He says no matter what, Kriyat Shema has to be before the Amidah. You must say the Shema and then follow it with the Amidah. So that means even if you're going to have a situation where you have to walk when you're saying the Amidah because you can't stop, because the caravan is not going to wait for you and you have to keep moving, it doesn't matter. Better that you should say the Kriyat Shema and followed by the Amidah, so that you can connect the blessing of Ga'al Yisrael to the Amidah. So this is a big machloket. What's more important is what's more important, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. One says that tefillah standing still is more important. In other words, the kavanah that you have when you stand still during the Amidah is even more important than preceding the Amidah with the Shema. However, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said no. It's more important to have the Shema precede your Amidah, even if that means you're going to have to be in transit, you're going to have to be traveling while you say the Amidah, you're going to actually have to be walking or sitting when you say the Amidah. It doesn't matter, it's more important. Marimar and Mar Zutra havu mechanfe be'asara b'shabbatat derigla. What they used to do was something very interesting, and I don't think this would happen today probably, but on the Shabbat, before one of the major Chagim, they would have these huge gatherings of Torah learning, called the Shabbat of the Regel, the Shabbat before the holiday. And on these enormous conventions, basically, they have these huge conventions. So they didn't have a minyan. They would start a shiur and be having drashot all day long, learning all day long, starting from dawn, and so, or maybe before that. And so people wouldn't have the opportunity to pray with the minyan. So what could they do? So what Maremar and Mar Zutra would do is they would make a minyan in their house first, before they went out to this shiur. So they were making a minyan very, very early. It was right after dawn, let's say. It was the stretching the time for tefillah as much as possible, to say it as early as possible. And then they would come to the shiur, so they didn't have to interrupt in the shiur to say any prayers. But so they would pray and then they would go to the shiur. Rav Ashi had something else he would do. That Rav Ashi had a different strategy. So he would actually be giving the shiur, and then in the middle of the shiur, just sitting there, he would pray sitting right there. He wouldn't even get up. Now what did the people do? So Rashi explains that what people would do was, they would go out in the middle of the shiur and pray biyachid. They would pray individually, and then come back in. So people would step out, quickly do the Shema and the Amidah, and come back in. Step out, come back in. So Rav Ashi could have done that, but he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to get up and make everybody stand up for him and interrupt. So what he would do was he would give a lot of material to the Turgaman. They used to have somebody who would speak, a spokesperson for the Doresh, for whoever the Rav was. He would give the material to the Turgaman. The Turgaman would be the one to explain it and to go around telling everybody what the Rav said. He didn't have to yell, he didn't have to project his voice. And while the Turgaman was doing that, Rav Ashi would be sitting right there, and he would be saying the Shema and saying the Amidah, just sitting there. He didn't get up and he didn't leave from his place during the shiur. So these are two different strategies. One strategy was pray at home before you come. The other strategy was sit there and pray while everybody else is learning. So he didn't get up and leave, and he didn't pray before. So the question, so why did he do that? So they said, and then the other thing he did was, when he would get home, then he would go and pray again. He would pray standing up. In other words, he would say the Kriyat Shema and the Amidah sitting down in the middle of the shiur, and then he would go home and he would say the Amidah again. Yeah. So the Mefarshim ask, what is the reason for this? Why is he doing this? So the basic approach seems to be this, that he wanted to accomplish two things. He wanted to say the Shema at the proper time and to attach the Shema to the Amidah. Right. But then he felt, Rashi explains, he didn't feel that he had sufficient kavanah in his Amidah when he was sitting down, so he would go back when he got home and he would say the Amidah again, maybe as a Tefilat Nidava, because back then they would do what's called Tefilat Nidava. You could do another Amidah if you wanted to. A voluntary Amidah, Tefilat Nidava. So he would go home and do that because he didn't feel that he was capable of really praying with proper kavanah. However, other Mefarshim say no, it wasn't because he wasn't capable of praying with proper kavanah. It was because he held that if you pray the Amidah sitting down, and then that's only allowed in an emergency situation, but if you later have the opportunity to pray standing up, you have to redo it. And actually the Shulchan Aruch brings that as the halakha. He says if you're in trouble and you have to sit down during the Amidah, but let's say you're on an airplane and there's no way, there's turbulence, you can't stand. Okay? So then you land and you realize, hey, there's still a half hour left of the time of tefillah. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, you can actually do the Amidah again. However, the custom today, nowadays, is nobody does that. Yeah, nobody does that today. But the Shulchan Aruch actually says that. So, but the custom became not to do that, probably because we assume. Well, either because some people say it has to be tefillat nedava, and we don't do tefillat nedava today, because we say we're not on the level of kavanah really to say another tefillah after we said one. Who's to say the next one is going to be better, than the one before? So generally, that's the approach. We minimize extra tefillot. But actually, the law on the books and the Shulchan Aruch is that if you prayed sitting down and then you have another opportunity to pray standing up, that you're supposed to go back and do it again, even though nobody does that today. So they said to him, Amrei le Rabbanan, the rabbi said to him, Velevid Mar Zutra, why don't you just organize a minyan in your house, like Marimar and Mar Zutra did? And that way, when you come to synagogue, when you come to the shiur, you'll already have prayed. You won't have to worry. You prayed standing up, and you prayed properly. You just did it early. So he said to them, Amar lahu tzricha li milta. He said, I don't want to do that because it's difficult for me to do that. Because it's difficult for me to organize the minyan and then I have to come late. That's what Rashi says.
So it comes to this question, the reason for standing up, is it because of the kavod of the tefillah, or is it because of the kavanah?
Right, exactly. That's like what part of what the discussion is. That's part of what the discussion is here, for sure. So Rashi interprets the standing as having to do with kavanah. That's for sure. Is not kavod. It has to do more with kavanah. So in cases where kavanah would be ruined by having to stand, like in the case when you're with the donkey, that's why they say you should sit, because you're not going to have kavanah. That's exactly the reason. So so here what he's saying is, why didn't you do a minyan before? He says, well, because if I do a minyan before, tzricha milta, it's too difficult for me, because then I end up getting to the shiur later, and I don't like that. I like to be to the shiur earlier. So they said to him, okay, fine. So why don't you at least do like what the father of Shmuel and Levi used to do, which was they would pray the Amidah at home, just the Amidah, standing up, and then they would say the Shema later. Why can't you do it like that? That way you're able to say the Amidah standing up, so you don't have to go back and say it later. Okay, you don't have to say it over again. You don't have to say it twice, because you said it standing up the first time. You said it at home. Why don't you do that? So he says, because Amalu lo chazena leul rabbanan kishishe minan d'avdehachi. He said, you know what? I didn't see the rabbis who were older than me ever do that. In other words, in the previous generation, they never did that. That's his way of saying, I don't want to be more religious than the previous generation, right? If they didn't do that, they didn't feel that they should pray standing up before they came to the shiur, so that they would not have to pray the way that I do. So I'm not going to do that either. So because he didn't see a precedent for that, and also for separating, for not saying the Shema before the Amidah. He said, I didn't see that my teachers ever did that when they were in a certain situation of emergency, that they actually prayed the Amidah and only later said the Shema, sitting down. I never saw that they did that. I saw that they always said the Kriyat Shema followed by the Amidah. And therefore I'm going to always say the Kriyat Shema followed by the Amidah as well, which is generally what people do today. You don't see that people who have to leave early will say just the Amidah and later say the Kriyat Shema. That's not something you see very often, even though it is brought as a valid halachic opinion, in the poskim that somebody would do that. But you don't really see people do that at all today. Now we come to the new Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, "En tefilat musafin ela b'chever ir." What does this mean? He says, "There's no tefilat musaf unless you are in the community, unless you are with a minyan." In other words, there's no such thing as praying musaf by yourself. What's the reason for this? Well, the reason that would seem to be is because tefillat musaf is supposed to be unlike the other prayers that are a personal supplication. Musaf is just a substitute for the korban musaf. Why do you have tefillat musaf? Because of the korban musaf. The korban musaf, the sacrifice, wasn't an individual sacrifice. It was a communal sacrifice. So therefore, musaf should only be a communal prayer. That's what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says. The Chachamim say no, whether you're with a tzibur or not with a tzibur, whether with a minyan or not, you have to pray musaf. Even if you're by yourself, you have to pray musaf. And of course, that's the accepted halacha, that even if you're by yourself, you have to pray musaf. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishmo, Rabbi Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it wasn't that he said that if you don't have a minyan, you don't pray musaf. What he said was, Kol makom sheyesham chever ir yachid patur mitfilat musafin. What he says was, anytime there is a minyan, the yachid, the individual, is exempt from tfilat musafin, from the musaf prayer. In other words, you don't have to pray it biyachid if you're in the community. So there are three opinions here. One is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that says, if you're by yourself, you don't have to pray musaf at all. Only when you're in the minyan you have to pray. The Chachamim say whether you're in the minyan or you're at home, you have to pray it. And then Rabbi Yehuda says no. He gives a different version of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He says, what he said was, you do have to pray it if you're alone. You do. But if you're in the minyan, you don't have to pray it to yourself. You just listen to the Shliach Tzibur. The Shliach Tzibur is enough. In other words, there was no, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there wouldn't be a silent Amidah of Musaf followed by a repetition of the Chazan. There would just be the Chazan's prayer and everybody would listen.
So you wouldn't have a chiyuv automatically? Right,
you wouldn't have a personal chiyuv, but if you're not in the minyan, you do have a chiyuv. You can fulfill your chiyuv by just listening to the Chazan if you're in the minyan, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now what we hold, of course, is like the Chachamim, that you always have to do it to yourself. Okay, the Musaf. But there are these other two opinions here. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Hainu Tanakama. What exactly is the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the first opinion? What is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Yehuda? What are they differing on? Ikabenayu yachid shelo b'chever ir. Tanakama savar patur, Rabbi Yehuda savar chayav. According to the first version of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, if you are an individual, you're completely exempt from Musaf. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you're really obligated in Musaf. The only chidush, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is that if you're in the minyan, you can listen to the Chazan and you don't have to do it yourself. Amar Rav Huna bar Chinena. Rav Huna bar Chinena said, Rav Huna bar Chinena said, Amar Rabbi Chia, that Rabbi Chia said, that Rabbi Chia bar Rav said, Halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda, Shamar Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So he held, Rav Huna said that Rav Chia bar Rav said that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, which means you do have, in essence, an individual obligation. But if you come to synagogue, you don't have to do it. You can just listen to the Chazan, unlike any other prayer.
But we don't know what this is.
Not yet. Amar le Rav Chia bar Avin. Rav Chia bar Avin said to him, Shapir ka amrat. You're right. Da'amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, Miyamai lo matzlina tzlota de musafin biyachid. Because Shmuel once said, my whole life I never prayed musaf by myself, as an individual. In Nahar Da'a, But why? Because he was always in synagogue, so he didn't have to. Except for the one time that the army of the king came and occupied the city. And so the rabbis were caught up with this situation, with this army coming in, and so there was no minyan, so I had to pray by myself. So what does that show you? That Shmuel only prayed by himself, Musaf, when there was no minyan. But normally when there was a minyan, he just listened to the Shaliach Tzibur. He did not pray for himself. Shelo b'chever ir. So it says, and this was a yachid shelo b'chever ir. In other words, because I was a yachid, I was an individual, not with a minyan, so I had to pray on my own. Yativ Rabbi Hanina Kara Kamed Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Hanina Kara was sitting in front of Rabbi Yanai. Yativ Kamar, and what did Rabbi Hanina say? Halakha Rabbi Yehuda Shamar Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That Rabbi Yehuda, what he reported in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is the halakha. So again, he repeated the same thing that we heard before, that we follow the opinion that an individual by himself has to pray Musaf, but when he's in the minyan, he doesn't have to pray it. He just listens to the Shliach Tzibur, which is what Shmuel said. He said, because I was by myself, I had to do it. Amar Lei said to him, meaning Rabbi Yanai said to him, Puk kira kar'ech livara. Go out and read what you're reading outside. Meaning, that's not true. Get out of here. I'm going to throw you out if you say that. Why? We do not follow the halacha of Rabbi Yehuda, what he reported in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In other words, we follow the Chachamim that whether you are alone or you're in the synagogue, you have to pray the Amidah Musaf to yourself, no matter what. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Ani ra'iti et Rabbi Yanai, titzalei v'adar talei. I myself saw Rabbi Yanai that he prayed 2 silent Amidot when there was a Musaf. Meaning, he prayed both Shacharit to himself and Musaf. He didn't rely on the Chazan. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah said to him, le Rabbi Zerah, V'dilma mikra lo kiven dateh ulevasov kiven dateh. So what that Rabbi Yochanan saw Rabbi Yanai pray twice? Maybe he was just praying Shacharit twice. So Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking Rabbi Zerah, we heard this report that Rabbi Yanai held that you had to say Musaf to yourself. Maybe it's not true. Maybe Rabbi Yanai prayed Shacharit and he wasn't satisfied with his level of kavanah, so he went back and prayed it again. Maybe that's why he prayed twice. But really, Musaf, you don't have to pray it by yourself. You can listen to the Chazan. Answer. Look at what a great witness is testifying here. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan is the one testifying. If he didn't know that the second prayer that Rabbi Yanai said was Musaf, he wouldn't come and tell you that Rabbi Yanai prayed Musaf to himself. He would say he prayed twice and I don't know why. He's not going to come and make an allegation or an assertion without knowing the facts. So the fact that Rabbi Yochanan came and said that he saw Rabbi Yanai pray both Shacharit to himself and then another silent Amidah, which was the Musaf to himself, means that he knew that was the Musaf. And it wasn't just a case where Rabbi Yanai had to repeat the Amidah for some other reason. So therefore we see that Rabbi Yanai holds that you do have to pray it to yourself, and that is what the halacha is, like the Chachamim, that you have to pray it to yourself. Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi, even though there were 13 synagogues in Tiberia, they would never pray anywhere but between the pillars where they would be studying Torah. In other words, in their Beit Midrash was where they would pray. Tosafot brings an opinion, some of the Rishonim bring, that this shows you that praying in the place where you study Torah is actually better than praying with a minyan, because it sounds like they didn't have a minyan. But the Rambam says no. The Rambam says it's better to pray in a place of Torah. It's better. If you have a choice to pray in a Beit Midrash or a Beit Knesset, it's better to pray in a Beit Midrash, because a Beit Midrash, a place of study, actually has a greater level of Kiddusha. But only if you're praying with a minyan. Tefillah b'tzibur is most important. So you can't say, I'm going to pray in the Beit Midrash, just me and my chavruta, we're going to pray in our Beit Midrash and that's good enough. No. If you have a choice of a minyan in the Beit Midrash versus a minyan in the synagogue, then you should go to the Beit Midrash. But if it's a choice between praying by yourself in the Beit Midrash and praying with a minyan in the Beit Knesset, you have to go to the Beit Knesset and pray with a minyan. Moving on, so Itmar, it was stated, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Mishum Rabbeinu Amar, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said in the name of Rabbeinu, Halachak Rabbi Yehuda Shamar Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Again, somebody who held like Rabbi Yehuda. that you don't have to pray by yourself from Musaf if you're in the minyan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba, tzali v'adar tali. Rabbi Chia bar Abba went and prayed twice. Amar le Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said, "Ma'ita avid marachi." Why did you do that? Rabbi Eliezer. If it's because you're going to tell me you had to repeat shacharit because the first time you didn't concentrate, but Rabbi Eliezer said, how could you do that? How could you go ahead and pray without having kavanah? I'm disappointed in you. Right? So you prayed silently twice. Was it because you didn't concentrate the first time? Well, why didn't you follow what Rabbi Eliezer said? Rabbi Eliezer said a person should always measure themselves first and determine if they have proper kavanah, and they shouldn't start praying until they know that they're going to be able to concentrate properly on their tefillah. If they're not sure they're going to be able to concentrate properly on their tefillah, they should wait for the moment that they are. So why would you go ahead and pray shacharit when you're unprepared and then go back and pray it again? Rather, so what was the reason? So so it must be that you forgot to say Ya'aleh V'yavo because it was Rosh Chodesh. Maybe that's why you went back and repeated the Amidah. I don't know why he doesn't just wait for him to answer. He gives him lots of different suggestions before he waits to hear. He says, maybe it's because you forgot Ya'aleh V'yavo. But if that's the case, V'atanya, but we said in the Braita, Ta'avlo is Kishal Rosh Chodesh B'arvit, En Machzirin Oto, Nipnei Shechol Omra B'Shacharit. We said that if a person forgets to say Ya'aleh V'yavo in the evening, at Arvit, he doesn't have to repeat this Shemona Esrei because he can always say it in Shacharit. B'Shacharit, En Machzirin Oto, Nipnei Shechol Omra B'Musafin. And if he misses it in Shacharit, no problem, he'll say it in Musaf. B'musafin and machzirin oto. If he forgets it in musaf, don't worry, he'll say it in mincha. So this is a very lenient approach to Ya'aleh V'yavo here. It says you never have to repeat it. Okay? So Amar le, lav itmar Allah. So he was right. He really did forget Ya'aleh V'yavo. That was why he repeated his Amidah. But he said to him, wait a second. When
would then have enough kavanah that he would forget Ya'aleh V'yavo?
I guess he had so much kavanah and everything else he forgot Ya'aleh V'yavo.
That's gigantic.
Yeah, that's a big.
Gigantic.
He had a lot of kavanah in tefillah, but not a lot of kavanah in the fact that it was Rosh Chodesh. I guess. I don't know. Everyone makes mistakes. Okay, so he says, Amar le lavit marala, Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'tzibur shanu. That Rabbi Yochanan said that rule that you don't have to repeat the Amidah if you forget Ya'aleh V'yavo is only talking about b'tzibur. Rashi brings two opinions about what it means b'tzibur in the community. One is because why don't you have to repeat the Ya'aleh V'yavo? Because if you forgot Ya'aleh V'yavo and Shacharit, now just listen to the repetition of the Amidah from the Chazan, and you'll listen to as long as you listen. But the poskim say you have to stand still and listen to every word of the Amidah from the Chazan, and then instead of you repeating it, you'll fulfill the mitzvah through the Chazan. Or the other opinion, which is brought in Shulchan Aruch, actually is that if a person is the Chazan, in other words, if the Chazan himself forgets to say Ya'aleh V'yavo, he doesn't have to go back because he's going to repeat the Amidah and he'll be able to do it. But yeah, they forgot to scream at him when he forgot the Amidah, when he forgot the Ya'aleh V'yavo. Because of Tircha B'tzibura. Why? Because if you make the Chazan now repeat the Chazan finished, and now you're going to make him repeat it again, it's Tircha B'tzibura. Now the whole tzibur is going to have to listen again. He's going to have to wait again for him to repeat it again. That's too much. So we don't impose that upon the community. Now we just have one last piece in this perek. So kama yisheh ben tefillah la tefillah. How if a person has to repeat the Amidah either because they forgot to say something, or because they're saying Shacharit and Musaf and therefore they have to say two Amidot, or because they're making up for a tefillah that they forgot, that they missed. They missed mincha and they're saying the Amidah Arvit twice. So how long do they have to wait in between Amidot? Rav Huna and Rav Chisda each had an opinion on this. One said until his mind is titchonen alav, which means it's in a state of tachanunim. It's from the same word as tachanunim, which means it's in a state of supplication again. Because the problem is when you say an Amidah twice, the first time maybe you had lots of kavanah. The second time you're going to rush through because you just said it. You don't want to say it again. So you're going to rush. So until you feel that you're ready to do it. And the other one says, which is basically the same thing. Rashi says these are two words for the same thing. They just use different language. Shetitcholel again means that the person can pray properly, that they're not going to do it as a mechanical action. The one that said titchonen, used the language of titchonen, that's because dichtiv vet chanan el Hashem, because that was Moshe Rabbeinu's language, vet chanan. Uman damar kadesh titcholel dato alav. The one that said titcholel, even though they're both basically saying the same idea, is because dichtiv vaychal Moshe, because it says vaychal Moshe, that Moshe prayed with the word vaychal. So that would be titcholel. But the point is that one should wait. Now, what is the practice today? Is that when you have to say tu amidot, you say ashrei yoshvei betecha in between. That gives you a little break to refocus your mind. Amar Rav Anan said, Amar Rav, that Rav said, ta'avlo eskesh Rosh Chodesh b'arvit, en machzirin oto. If a person forgets to mention Rosh Chodesh in Arvit, he doesn't have to go back. Lefi she'en bet din mekadeshin et chodesh el bayom. Because the bet din doesn't declare Rosh Chodesh at night anyway. So even if the nighttime were Rosh Chodesh, the bet din wouldn't be declaring it at night. So if you forgot to say Yalev Yavo, it's okay. Just wait till the morning. That's not true, by the way, about Yalev Yavo on Chagim. People make a mistake. They think on Chol HaMoed, if they forget Yalev Yavo of Sukkot, that they don't have to repeat. That's not true. It's only for Rosh Chodesh that there's an exemption at night. Amar Amemar said, Mistabra milta derav b'chodesh maleh. Aval b'chodesh chaser machzirin oto. He said, this statement of Rav makes sense in a Chodesh Maleh, when the previous month was 30 days long, which means to say that when we have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, when the previous month was 30 days long, that means that the 30th day of the previous month is the first day of Rosh Chodesh, and the first day of this month is the first day of is the second day of Rosh Chodesh, which is really the first day. Let's say in Elul, for example, we had 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. One was Shabbat. That was really the 30th day of Av. And then the first day of Elul was Sunday. Okay? So in that case, it says, there it makes sense that you would say that if a person forgot at Arvit, on, let's say, on Friday night, they forgot at Arvit to say Yalev Yavo, no problem. Why? Because tomorrow night, when it's really the first day of Elul, Saturday night, that's when it really counts. But in a month where the nighttime of Rosh Chodesh, it's really Rosh Chodesh, there's only 1 day of Rosh Chodesh. So we're dealing with a case where the previous month was only 29 days. So the first day is the real day. So then, that night you should repeat it because you're really missing on Rosh Chodesh itself. There shouldn't be a leniency. But they said to him, no. Amar le Rav Ashi la Amemar. Rav Ashi said to Amemar, Michdi. Rav ta'amak amar. Wait a second. Rav says his reasoning. Mali chaser, mali maleh. It doesn't make a difference if it's a Chodesh chaser, where the previous month was 29 days, and therefore we have only 1 day of Rosh Chodesh, and it's the real deal. And it doesn't make a difference if the previous month is 30 days, and that first night of Rosh Chodesh is really still the previous month. It's not really the first day of the new month. It doesn't matter. Because what did Rav say was the reason you don't go back? It's because they didn't do Kiddush HaChodesh at night. They didn't declare Rosh Chodesh at night. That's the reason. It's not because it's not really Rosh Chodesh. It's because the Bet Din didn't declare Rosh Chodesh at night, even if it was really Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, it shouldn't make a difference. And Ela Lo Shana. In any case, whether it's a 1 day Rosh Chodesh and you miss Yalev Yavo at night, or it's a 2 day Rosh Chodesh and you missed Yalev Yavo on the first night or the second night, it never matters. You don't have to go back and repeat the Amidah in that case because Ein Mekadeshin et Chodesh Balayla, because the Bet Din never declared Rosh Chodesh at night, not because it's any less Rosh Chodesh at night, but because the recitation of Yalev Yavo is in a way our way of declaring Rosh Chodesh, like the Bet Din used to do. And since the Bet Din didn't declare Rosh Chodesh at night, we don't have to hold ourselves responsible if we omitted Yalev Yavo for Rosh Chodesh at night. Hadran alach tefilat hashachar, hadran alach tefilat hashachar, hadran alach tefilat hashachar. We conclude the 4th parak of Masekhet Berakhot, and Be'ezrat Hashem, this Shabbat we start the 5th parak. Have a great day. Shabbat Shalom.